now we will dive into some of our theories.
Theory corner.
We're so excited for Theory Corner. So it's probably going to be one of the last ones we do for the year.
Yeah, I mean,
I
because
mean, we might do it for Kingdom of the Wicked, but there's only 3 books in that
ooh,
series, so we can
yeah, and I
speculate.
think this one's so easy to like theorize about because it's
It's
a bunch of
connected.
interconnected series. So it's like it's hard to like to justify theorizing about a bunch of things when it's like, okay, there's 3 books in the series and they're all out. Like, what are you going to theorize? It's already
Yeah.
written. But this
We
one's like,
are eventually going to do Throne of Glass, but it
yeah,
probably won't be till next year.
there's just so many of them. Mm.
2024 is your Throne of Glass.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll kick off the year with them again, like we always do with these. It'll
Yeah.
be our little Sarah January mass, if you will. Does
Yes.
the J stand for January?
No, it
It
doesn't.
does now. So what do you have first on your list that of things you want to discuss?
So, the first thing that I'd like to discuss is the Asteri, but also the Asteri's Wild Hunt.
Okay.
Which we don't know if it's exactly the Asteri's Wild Hunt because it was actually first mentioned in A Court of Silver Flames,
Mm-hmm.
that the Daglin had a wild hunt. So I'll start with the Asteri first. They have been mentioned multiple times in the Akatar series, the first time actually being in A Court of Mist and Fury. So when Rhysand first got the Book of Breathings, he needed Amren to decode it because it was written in an ancient language that no one understood. And so he said, I heard a legend that it was written in the tongue of mighty beings who feared the cauldron's power and made the book to combat it. Mighty beings who were there and then vanished, and you're the only one who can read it. So I do still think that Amren is somehow interconnected with the Asteri. Also, I read this passage last time, but it's from A Court of Silver Flames when Rhysand is talking about the Daglin. So he says, the Fae were not the first masters of this world. According to our oldest legends, most now forgotten, we were created by beings who were near gods and monsters. The Daglin, they ruled for millennia and enslaved us and the humans. They were petty and cruel and drank the magic of the land like wine. So obviously that's the Asteri.
Yeah.
And then he talks about Theon, who had the sword Gwydion, and how Theon was slain by his queen and their high general, and like they fled and took all this stuff with them, which I'm assuming is the Star Sword. But
So
Farah
Amryn even
asks,
says at the end, she says Gwydion,
yes,
at the end of Sky and Breath.
yeah. So obviously the Star Sword is Gwydion, and it
Mm-hmm.
has the matching dagger that belongs to Azriel. But Feyre asks, does Amren remember this? And Rhys shakes his head and says, only vaguely now. From what I've gleaned, she arrived during those years before Theon and Gwydion rose and went into the prison during the Age of Legends, the time when this land was full of heroic figures who were keen to hunt down the last members of the former master's race. They feared Amren, believing her one of their enemies, and threw her into the prison.
Mm.
So it lines up that Amren arrived probably around the same time as the Asteri.
Yeah.
I don't know if she is one of them. I think maybe she was one of the Wild Hunt because do you remember her saying she worked for a very powerful master?
Yes. Because like I at first thought she was also a Steri, but it doesn't make sense with what she told Farah of her history. Like she was a soldier for a master that was more powerful than
Right. Well, they think she was one of the members of the hunt. So then Cassian later asks, you still haven't explained the Wild Hunt. And so Rhys says, the Daglin delighted in terrorizing the Fae and humans under their control. The Wild Hunt was a way to keep us all in line. They'd gather a host of their finest, most merciless warriors and grant them free rein to kill as they please. The Daglin possessed mighty beasts, or mighty monstrous beasts, hounds they called them, though they didn't look like the hounds we know. They used to run prey to the ground before they tortured and killed them. It's a terrible history, and much of it might be elaborated myths. So Lanthus, who was in the prison with Amren, was one of the members of the Wild Hunt, and he talks about a time when the Wild Hunt was allowed to reign free. And he basically wanted to like restore it to what it was when Nesta was like facing him down and he saw her death sword. So I think maybe Amryn is also a member of the Wild Hunt, but I also think maybe the Under King might be what is essentially like their current day Wild Hunt, because he does report to the Asteri, and he also has the shepherds, which look
Yeah.
very, very similar to the beasts that are in the Night Court.
Mhm.
And he basically uses that to round up the souls who don't want to cross through the Death Gate and give their second light to the Asteri. And he also lives off of that second light. So I don't think he is a fairy, but I do think he is obviously in cahoots with them.
No, that makes sense.
But what also reminded me of the Under King was the other death gods that are in Akatar. And so he sounds a lot like the Bone Carver, Koschei, and the Striga, because if you remember the Bone Carver, he was describing his sister and how she devoured the essence of people to keep herself young and youthful. And
Hmm.
so I don't know if she was one of the original Asteri or if she was like part of the hunt or not, but I think they're related to that as well.
That is interesting because like the Striga, like they basically they didn't put her in the prison because instead like they put her in her little like cottage or whatever in like the middle. And
Mm-hmm.
they were like, okay, but you can't leave here.
Right.
So it is kind of weird too because it's almost like she was given a little bit of a special treatment
Mm-hmm.
in that way.
So maybe she like
So
assisted when they were initially fighting the Asteri.
maybe, like maybe
I
they
don't
were like,
know.
okay, but you can't run amok.
It just seemed like they were way too similar for there not to be like a connection.
Yeah. And it's like in that same way. Well, and I mean, this is a different planet as well, but like the Underking kind of has like his own realm as well. Like he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really leave there. And like whenever he did leave, it was actually just like a projection of him.
Well, the bone carver has his own little realm underneath the
Hmm.
prison too. And so I'm wondering when the Asteri were first there and they left, if the bone carver chose to stay because he knew it was like safer there
Yeah.
and he didn't have to deal with his siblings who were members of the hunt. I don't know. But that's just what it reminded me of. Also, the Asteri have like all of their like different pictures of like the universes and stuff. And in A Court of Silver Flames, Nesta mentions that there's 26 strings on the harp and there's 26 different dimensions that it can travel to. So I'm assuming that's how many there are that the Asteri can go through. I don't know if that's, I mean, I'm sure it will make a difference later on, but I think the Wild Hunt will probably make a bigger reappearance if and when they do fight the Asteri. But I think there are former members that are in the prison that are also still on Prithian. Maybe even what is the thing that Cassian was afraid of that was under the library?
Oh, I can't remember its name.
Caraxes? No.
Bryaxis.
Bryaxis.
Yeah.
So I think those are all creatures like left over from when the Asteri were first there.
Okay. No, that makes sense to me. I do remember all of that now.
Also, have you gotten to the part of Throne of Glass where they talk about runes?
No, I'm only I haven't read any more of it since I read Sky and Breath yesterday, but
Mm.
the last thing that happened was
They should have already talked about it because Nehemia used runes during her trial to become the assassin for the king.
word marks.
Yeah.
Okay, they haven't
Yeah, they're
referred to them as
runes.
runes.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
they're like the word marks, like are different like symbols and stuff.
Yeah, so far they've only referred to them as word marks, but
Well, so when they were visiting the Under King, it said that there were marble and granite obelisks that rose like thick spears inscribed, not with names, but with strange symbols. And that
Mhm.
reminded me of like the word
Word
marks.
marks. Yeah. And the word marks are what give you like the ability to in Throne of Glass give you the ability to open the gates basically and
Mm-hmm.
summon things through them.
So some of the connections that I made between what is Midgard compared to like Prithian and Aurelia, which is the world and Throne of Glass. Um, the very beginning of the book gives away a lot of, I think, important information. So we're looking at like the statues at the beginning. So we see the statue of a male with an anvil striking a sword with lightning in the sky. So I think either this is a depiction of Gwydion being crafted, because it is written in the language of the old Fae, titled Making of the Swords. That is like the first Fae language. So obviously it had to originate in Prithian. So it's either like alluding to like Hunt's involvement with Bryce, which it most certainly could be, or it's giving us a hint at like who was like creating the sword. So that could have also been Fionn.
Mm-hmm.
In Court of Silver Flames. Or it also reminded me of when Cassian was telling the story of like why Ramiel is like the sacred mountain to the Illyrians, and how he was fighting off like a great army at the beginning of their history, and like he basically laid down his life like at the top of the mountain, and that became like the legend of like why they had to reach the top of Ramiel. Like the depiction of that guy kind of reminded me of him. So I don't know if that's a connection either. Then on page 32, this is the one I thought was really interesting. It talks about an armored figure with a helmet atop a Pegasus. So my very first initial reaction was to think
Mm-hmm.
Helion, because he is always seen riding a Pegasus when he comes to like the night court, and like he has like the last Pegasi in the world. However, the Pegasi actually originated from the island that the prison is on. And so, because that's now where the prison sits and it's guarded by wards, the Pegasi can't live there. And we think that the island that the prison sits on is also the Dusk Court. And
Yeah.
so that could be a warrior from the Dusk Court. Like it could be
I'm
one of the
feeling so stupid right now because I literally just realized something.
what?
And it has to do with like the Isle of Dusk. That's talked about in Sky and Breath.
Oh
The
yeah, like
Isle
at
of
the
Dusk.
very end.
Yeah, I was
Um
like, oh my God, I'm so
so
stupid. Okay.
at the very end, yeah, Rigelus says, "Not your kind of fae, of course. Your breed dwelled in a lovely verdant land rich with magic, and while the mainland had all manners of climes, the isle existed in a beautiful near permanent twilight off the coast,"
Mm-hmm. That's the Dusk
which
part.
is where the prison is. Because at first I was like, oh my God, is it Hybern?
Well, because that's also an isle, but
I think it's the prison, because that's what
I think it's the
Rhysand
prison
always hinted at
too.
too. Because he's like, yeah, some say this could have even been like an eighth court at one point in time, and it's like,
Right.
oh well, yeah, that's got to be it,
And of course, dusk is missing from like we have dawn, we have day, we have night, we don't have dusk.
right?
So that is the eighth court.
Um, well, and so I also maybe thought it had been Hybern at first, because Cormac mentions his cousins who are twins who have Daemati powers,
Okay, hold on. Let me pull up a map. You keep talking. Let me pull up a map
because
real
Rune
quick.
also mentions that he has cousins who are able to enter in other people's minds and like basically like, cast images and stuff. Um and so I was like, oh man, like maybe it is Hybern. Like I'm really not sure. Um and then like when the knife and sword are united, so shall our people be. Obviously, that is talking about the Star Sword and Truth Teller, which is the knife that Asriel has. I think that is obviously why Sarah J. Maas had him pick up Bryce initially. I was like, duh, because he recognized the sword the
Yeah.
second he saw it. And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. That tracks certainly. Oh, this is the one that I thought was very interesting. So on page 267, Bryce asks if the gods from their home planet came with them or stayed where they are. And this is what the Underking said about Erd. He said, from a time when Erd was not a goddess, but a force winding between worlds, she was a vat of life, a mother to all, a secret language of the universe. Fae worshipped her then. So it reminded me a lot of the cauldron and the mother. And
Yes.
then when Nesta is in the prison, Lanthus asks her, whose fire do you contain in you? And I think it's like whatever Erd is, or like whatever the mother is, that's what she like stole from the
Ooh.
cauldron.
Because like also like okay, so the mother built the cauldron or whatever, but like
Mm-hmm.
can't she also like take it away?
I don't
And like
know.
Nesta is like a death goddess.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, can't she also take things away, basically?
So I don't know if she's supposed to be like the personification of it or what, but I think Erd and the mother of the cauldron are the same thing. And so
Yeah.
I think that yes, the gods do overlap each other. They're just maybe called different things for different planets.
Yeah. And especially
Um,
because of how much the language changed, because like Bryce, is fluent in the Old Fae language as well, which
mhm.
Amryn was able to converse with her in. But Amryn even tells her, she's like, that hasn't been spoken here for over 15,000 years.
Well, and so then I did like a little more connection on that, and the same thing kind of happens in Throne of Glass too, which I think you've already heard mention of Diana, like the goddess of the hunt or the moon.
Yes,
She
because
like gave her the
Selena gave her the blessing.
yes. So Deanna and Luna are the same person. I think they're both based off of the goddess Artemis.
Hmm.
So Deanna is the goddess of hunting, maidenhood, and the moon. Luna is also the goddess of hunting, the maidens, and the moon.
Yeah.
They both symbolize, like their symbols are the golden arrow, and they're used as like guidance basically to some of our main characters. And
Yeah.
so I think they're the same. I think Mala Firebringer, who is talked about a little bit in Throne of Glass, is the same person as Erd or the Cauldron. So I think it all just like overlaps each other.
Yeah, like they have the same like traditions, but they're just getting changed
Exactly.
as they like make their new worlds. Like things are just being
Mm-hmm.
translated into different languages, basically.
Yep. Before I go into like more about the Dusk Court and stuff, what have you got pulled up here for us?
Well, this actually would relate to the Dusk Court, so we can kind
Oh.
of jump right in. But I mean, the reason why I've brought this map to you is because so the Isle of Dusk. So you were talking about like how Cormac's cousins, they're twins that are also Daemati. So it's like, well, they could share lineage with Hybern. So what if when the prison like took over the Isle of Dusk and like the Eighth Court basically got eliminated because, Theon was killed, betrayed.
Mm-hmm.
What if the remaining descendants who didn't cross over with what's her name? Thea?
Mm-hmm.
What if the remaining Fae that didn't cross over with them just didn't have anywhere else to go?
They
So they just
migrated to Hybern.
yeah, they literally just migrated because like all of
Oh.
these courts would have been established already. Because it
Right.
says like all of at that point, if there were 8 courts, that means the other 7 were already established. So what if there was nowhere for them to go except for this uncharted, unconquered land?
Interesting. Yeah, because we
Um,
don't know a ton about the King of Hybern's like past.
yeah, and it's like that's not considered a court.
Well, and if you remember, the High King, it event like he was killed or whatever, and it dissolved into the eight courts. So the High King was still there whenever Thea crossed over to what is now Midgard with like Peleus and Helena and her other daughter. However, her other daughter disappeared. They don't know where she went. So
She
I'll talk about
fled.
her. So I don't know. It definitely could be.
Yeah, because like it doesn't seem like there's any history stating that there was any court there necessarily. Like it just kind of seems like Hybern just kind of popped up later in history.
Yeah. Well, also, like, this is the part where it gets a little confusing. So, like, the Asteri show up or the Daglin show up, right? And under a unified front, which is Fionn and Gwydion, because he was the High King and everything was under him. So it was a unified army under Fionn,
Mm-hmm.
defeated the Asteri, which they even say didn't. So when they were talking about like the planet Ifraxia, they said the denizens learned of our methods too quickly and we lost many to their unified front, so we evacuated. But later on, they said they returned and they did not see the old enemy who offered a hand through space and time. So they
Yeah.
opened the rift, and that is when Thea and Peleus and her two daughters came through the rift. So it was a long time after Theon had already conquered the Asteri and had set up like the high whatever, and he was still the high king when he was slaughtered, and then they broke up into the eight courts.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because whenever you think of a Valen, the Valens have a high king still.
Yeah, that's true. Because
And
it's
so
like their traditional old ways.
mm-hmm. And so they said that the Dusk Court was like a mist shrouded isle, right? And whenever they're talking about a Valen, it says even the Asteri cannot pierce the mist without permission to do so. So old is the magic that guards it.
Yeah.
Which sounds a lot like the same magic that guards Valaris.
It does, because that's kind of, yeah, it just kind of like hides it from sight, basically.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I did mention, like, I didn't catch that the first read through. Like, it didn't stick, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever he was like, even the Asteri can't reach them there, I was like, oh,
So it's like a whole Wild West out there. They're doing
yeah,
what they want to in a Valen.
yeah, which is interesting.
And also, like, he also said the star will lead us back to that world, that because they want to go back to Prithian because the land there is like full of magic, which makes
Mhm.
sense why the people who are there now are not full of magic, because they relied on the land, like we said last time.
Yeah.
And
And it's like
that's what
not only do they not have their magical land in their realm of Midgard, but the Asteri are also actively draining their land of magic.
exactly.
So it's like a double a double whammy.
And that's exactly how Rhysand described the Daglan, that they drank from their land like fine wine because
Hmm.
it's so full of magic. And so I think that's why Bryce landed in Prithian instead of Hell, because the star was guiding her back home.
Yes, for sure. That totally makes sense to me because like she thought that she needed to go to hell, but I think that her power kind of like directs her. Like it doesn't go based on like what she wants. Like she
Mm-hmm.
always is accidentally teleporting or, and so that's kind of why I was talking about when we were just like theorizing and hoping that Cormac was still alive. I wonder if like her power would just take him anyway, just because it
Yeah,
would just be like, we need that guy. Like it's doing everything for her.
right. But the last thing is, it's actually from A Court of Silver Flames. Nesta mentioned seeing a fourth trove item, but it was mostly hidden from her, but all she could make out was a bit of bone. And so I think that was Luna's horn. That was one of the trove
Hmm.
items. And so that's going to complete the Dread Trove. And Bryce is now back in Prithian. And last we know, Koschei had taken some of those trove items. And so Koschei is what I think is one of the Wild Hunt members for the Asteri, and so I think it's all gonna come like full circle. Or he
Oh,
is an Asteri, I don't actually know, but I do think the horn is the last trove item. And
I
so
see.
I think that's the horn. And if you'll remember, like it had talked about like people being trapped in the walls and stuff there.
Mhm.
And so I don't know at what point in time the prison became the prison, but I think with the removal of the horn, it threw everything out of whack. And so the harp somehow closed off the court to what it is now. And so all of the people of their court were trapped within the walls,
God, that's horrifying.
which is terrible.
That's like
Or when
under the mountain.
or the Asteri may have opened that rift, and when they closed it, like it was basically like shutting a wall. And so
Mm.
like people couldn't get like their children through the rift when it was open. Like they were trying to like cross over. I don't know. I'm interested to see about that as well.
Imagine how horrifying that truth would be if they've been trapped in the wall for that long.
Yeah, terrible. But I do think that kind of completes the full circle there. Obviously, I think Nest is able to handle the trove items because she is from the Dusk Court.
Mm-hmm.
Same with the Archerons.
Yeah.
I'm kind of jumping around here, but I think that, like, in terms of their lineage, it kind of falls under Cormac stuff. But whenever they talked about Thea's daughters and they said one of them escaped, I think one of them was able to stay in Prithian, and that they fled, and that's what started Farah's like line
Mm. That they
because
fled
they
to the
said,
Mortal Lands?
because they're obviously descended from Fae,
Yeah.
but that
And
would
I mean, they could
explain,
have fled to like the main continent too.
yeah, for sure.
And like, because, especially because, um, Farah's family also like had wealth up until like they were literally
Hmm.
everything was stolen from them. So it's like at one point they could have migrated over to like
Right.
the
But
smaller.
that would maybe explain how like the power kept going through the Archeron side, but then
Mhm.
night-haired Helena, she's also Starborn, but she sounds so much like Rhysand and Rune. And
Yeah,
so I'm confused how that line started. Because like when you think about Cormac and Rune, Bryce commented on how their shadows looked different. And I think that's because Cormac is from the Dusk Court and Rune is from like
the night
primarily the
court.
Night Court.
No, that makes sense to me. And I think like as far as like how their lineage would have started is like when people from the Dusk Court like crossed over, like they would have been like geographically, they would have been very close to the Night Court.
Right.
Potentially, there could have been just like other allies, like from that originated from the Autumn Court.
Hmm.
Like, who's to say that they didn't? Because like even in the Akatar books, like people from other courts live like reside in other courts. Like Alice hailed from the Summer Court originally.
Hmm.
Obviously Lucian hailed from the Autumn Court originally. So like I don't think like just because you were from a certain lineage that you wouldn't geographically be in a different location.
Right.
So potentially like two by two, they all just kind of went through the rift and they were like, we need one of every kind.
The thing that stumps me the most, though, is that I really thought Rune was somehow like a descendant of Rhysand, but I think Rune and Rhysand are both descendants of the same person, which is Helena.
Yes, I think that they are descended from Helena rather than like directly related to each other.
Yes. Um, which kind of shatters my next idea because like when Cormac was described as having blonde hair and chocolate eyes, it sounded a lot like Elaine,
It does.
but that could just be because they're families, like they're related.
Like from the Dusk Court. Like Cormac is from
Mhm.
the Dusk Court as well. So,
Yeah.
and that's
Because
what
they
I was
always
gonna say
talk about
earlier.
how Elaine has different features than Nesta and Feyre,
Hmm.
and I wonder if it's because she looks more like members of the Dusk Court.
Yeah.
But Nesta has the tattoo, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, regardless, they still share the same lineage, like regardless of what physical
But
feature.
Nesta's the oldest, so I would assume like if anyone is in line for, because if they are descended from Thea's other daughter, then they are in line for the court basically because
Yeah.
Thea would have been married to Theon.
I think Nesta's about to become a high lady
I
or high
don't
queen.
know. I don't know. But
But then
now
it's
we
like
also
Bryce
have
is also
Bryce. Yeah.
descended from the Dusk Court. But then obviously, like the Autumn King, her father must have some Autumn Court lineage as well.
Right. Which
So
they
is Bryce
also
about to be like
said,
High Queen?
I don't know, with
Because like she
Azriel.
has so many
Which we
lineage.
don't know anything about Azriel's lineage either, because he also has the powers of the shadows. And
Yeah.
so does Rune, and so does Cormac, which was a Starborn gift. And so Azriel obviously is also possibly of the Starborn lineage. So his family may have also been from the Dusk Court.
This is turning my brain to soup.
which Romuel is close to, like, it's in the Illyrian Steppes, which if you look at where the prison is, it's located smack dab in between the Illyrian Steppes and the Night
In the
Court.
night court. Yeah, it's literally just a little island right in the middle.
So Asriel's about to be important. He's about to be super important.
Especially because he's wielding the dagger
Yeah. And the shadows, and no one else has that gift, probably because there's not a lot of people left from the Dusk
from
Court.
the dust court. Yeah. So it's like these starborn powers. And it's funny because like you think Rhysand like would have like starborn, because like he has stars in his eyes and stuff. But I
Mm-hmm.
think like he does, obviously he has some starborn lineage because of Helena,
Helena.
but I think like the true like starborn abilities are more from the Dusk Court itself.
Yeah. Because it was said that Thea's other daughter didn't have any starborn abilities, but just because she didn't doesn't
Doesn't
mean
mean it wouldn't
her
show up.
offspring wouldn't.
Because like even Rune, he barely has any, whereas Bryce has a
A
lot.
ton. She has Thea's light.
Yeah. And they also
So,
talked about there's different starborn powers because like Thea's starborn power is different from Peleus's.
mhm.
Wild, wild.
I mean, it definitely is all connected. I do think that Asriel is probably from the Dusk Court. Like his father, they don't know well, they know whose father is though.
Yeah, because he was like
He was an
tortured by
Illyrian
him.
commander. How did he get Truth Teller?
Let's see if I can just like Google
Does it
that.
ever say
We don't know, apparently.
how he got it?
Yeah, there's no mention where he got it from.
So that's sus.
Okay, somebody has a theory though. Hold on, I'm about to click it. Ooh, okay. Hey, I'm about to read this to y'all. So this is a Tumblr post. It is
Tumblr's the
by
best.
I guess is this just the blog name? I believe the blog name is Bat Boys and Archeron Girls.
Probably.
Okay.
Caitlin
So
doesn't Tumblr.
I don't Tumblr, I'm sorry. The title of this post, I love it, is The Illyrians a crack theory.
Love it.
So the theory in summary is that the Illyrians are originally demons from hell that Adis or Apollyon, maybe even Thea, sent
Yes.
with Thea's second daughter through the rift to protect her and truth teller. So Thea's second daughter. In House of Sky and Breath, we again learned that Thea and Fionn had two daughters, Helena and a second daughter. While Helena was forced to wed Peleus and remain in Midgard, no one knows what happened to her second daughter. Indeed, Adis says that she disappeared into the night and he never learned of her fate. So, oh, and then they put asterisks and said the real Adis, of course, may know where Thea's second daughter is because that was Regulus.
Right.
So they said the Star Sword had a twin, without which the Star Sword does not have all of its powers. As far as the history books show, Gwydion's twin was lost sometime during the First Wars. We also learn in House of Sky and Breath that the Star Sword is Gwydion and that its twin is Truth Teller, which is in Prythian.
What if Thea's daughter took the dagger back? Is
She
that what
could
they're trying to
have.
get at?
Well, let me see. So this says my best guess is that Thea's second daughter took Truth Teller through the rift
Okay.
to keep Peleus from being able to use it, which makes sense. She wouldn't want Peleus to have both
Yeah.
because that makes them more powerful. So it says originally, I wondered if she stole it from him after he killed her mother, but this passage gives me pause. And the passage says, so that star will lead us back to our world through you. They overthrew our brethren who once ruled there. We have not forgotten. Our initial attempt at revenge was foiled by your ancestor, who also bore that star on her chest. The Fae have still not atoned for the deaths of our brothers and sisters. Their home world was rich in magic. I crave more of it. Um, so this does say, was it Thea before Peleus slew her, or was it Helena after Thea died? Which one had a scar like Bryce? If
What
it
if it
was, oh, what if it was the other daughter? Is that what you're gonna say?
Well, that doesn't make sense if Bryce ends up with it.
Yeah, especially since the other daughter didn't have the Starborn
Well, and Helena
power.
is the one who would have been in Avalon, and
Yeah.
it said that the Autumn King's lineage mixed with that lineage at some point in time. So that's probably why Bryce ended up with it.
Yes. Yes, that makes sense.
But Helena's other Thea's other daughter took. So maybe that's where Rhysand's lineage comes from.
Maybe. This is I think their final conclusion is that they think,
Oh, that makes sense.
yeah, so they think Thea and Fion's second daughter fled through the rift with Truth Teller, returning it to Prithian, and I don't think she went alone. The Illyrians are hell demons.
Yes, because in the statues at the beginning of the book, it showed what she thought were demons with leathery bat wings.
Yes,
And
this is
then
here. That
whenever
you
she
need
saw
to call this
Azriel,
girl.
I know when she saw Azriel for the first time, she thought he was a demon because of his wings.
Yes.
So that makes
So
sense.
she's quoting whenever they're in the CCB's like hall looking at the art, and she's talking with Ember, and it says, um, the depiction of an army of winged demons swooping down from the skies. And yeah, so it's like Bryce remembers the leathery wings of the demons she killed in House of Earth and Blood. Um, and so that's why she thinks that it's
Mhm.
that Azriel is a demon.
So that would make so much sense because if Thea's second daughter took Truth Teller back with those demons, those are what established the Illyrians.
Mm-hmm.
And then if that is Rhysand's lineage, then the dagger somehow ended up with his family, and Asriel used to work for his father as his spy master. So I
Yeah.
bet he got the dagger from Rhysand's father.
Yeah. Probably. I wonder if she says anything else about the dagger itself. Okay, so if Azriel descends from Thea and Fion, they're his bloodline's weapons too. And if Azriel has one of them, he's had it for centuries. Did it choose him? Is that how he found it? Was he drawn to it? Um,
Oh yeah, I bet that's 100% what it is.
in conclusion, they say, also, regardless of when the Illyrians got to Prithian or why, I am officially convinced that they are demons from hell, and the questions are why they came, when they came, and why they're still here. So, I mean, as to why they're still here, I think they were just like, why not? But yeah.
Well, I mean that timing lines up because
Oh, the Tumblr page
during
is Silver Lined Eye. Sorry.
during the first war, so like what was initially in Prithian and then the second attempts at taking them. So what was Romuel, they had that guy who fought against what I'm assuming is the Daglin
Mm-hmm.
and like died on top of the mountain after defeating that host. And so I think that's where the initial lore came from.
Yeah.
And so, what if that was actually like one of the demons from hell or one of whatever that died on top of it? And so that just became like a Illyrian legend that it was an Illyrian warrior. I don't
I
know.
mean, yeah, because like well, and it would be like one of their ancestors. So, yeah, I don't
I
see
like
why.
that theory though about Thea's second daughter. I
Yes.
bet, yeah, that makes total sense that she's,
And I think that was like the missing piece that we were trying to
and that
find.
would make sense why the rest of the Dust Court is showing up in Midgard instead of Prithian.
Yes. Because they were all like,
Yeah.
they all followed. But the thing is,
Also,
Thea's second daughter just went back.
what if like Rhysand just has similar powers because of his lineage? Because he has powers they've never seen in the Night Court before.
Yes.
Like he's the greatest High Lord of all time because he has such unique gifts, which I'm sure he got from Thea's second daughter.
Yeah. Which also, okay, so like, and his mother is an Illyrian, and we're saying that Illyrians are originally from hell.
Right.
But like, if they came back over with Thea's second daughter, who's to say that Thea's second daughter didn't then mate with an Illyrian?
Exactly.
And so it's like all of that. If they haven't seen those powers in the Night Court before, maybe it's because like it's all of Reese's
It's
powers
on the
are
Illyrian
from his,
side.
yeah, his Illyrian slash
Oh, which
original
would make
Dust
sense
Court
why
heritage.
Asriel also has it.
Yes. So
Interesting.
they're kind of like brothers.
Ah, cute. I love that. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go with that. I love it.
I love it too. I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. I'm sorry. I just saw one more theory and I just
Okay.
want to share. Okay, so this person said This is, and that's that on Reddit. They said, I've been thinking that the Daglan created the Illyrians because one of Rigelus's lines is that our people who built fearsome warriors in the world to be their army, all of them prototypes for the angels in this one. But then they also said, but I
Oh.
forgot about the seraphim.
Yeah,
So I
that's
think
what
that the
I
seraphim
think.
fits better
But Rigel
with that.
also doesn't say where the Malakim come from. Like he
Yeah.
mentions everyone else except for them.
Yeah, but they do claim that the Asteri created angels.
Oh, okay.
They like in the first book,
So
they
maybe they
claim
did
that
base them off of the
the seraphim.
Seraphim
Yeah, they could have.
because Miriam's no. I mean, that was the first war, so that was before Miriam and Draken even started that island. So I'm sure the Seraphim were there.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. But it's like also the Asteri could be full of shit.
True. Hunt's different, so
Yeah, like Hunt, obviously he has angel lineage, but clearly he's different because like he even talks about his feathers are gray. He has these lightning powers. Like nobody
mhm.
else has these lightning powers. Like he's just not an angel in the way that the other Malakim are.
Like it said Hunt was the heart of a storm personified, which I was like, oh, maybe Thur. But
Mm-hmm.
then it's like a crown of lightning wrapped around Hunt's head, like a crown, making Hunt an anointed primal god.
Ooh.
And then it also says Orion was bred to be receptive to our kin. Why do you think he was so adept at hunting us? So if that was from Apollyon,
Mm-hmm.
so if they are descended from the Illyrians, that would make sense.
Mm-hmm. Because they're from
If
hell.
yeah, that's why he's receptive to their kin. I don't know.
I don't know either.
And then
And
Mordok
it's
says that
confusing too because it's like they bred him, but then it's like whoever his father is, like based on Jessica and Adis's conversation, it seems like it would be someone of like a higher standing, or at least like a can that had more power, maybe is a
mm-hmm.
better way to phrase it. And so like what if his Hunt's dad is actually
I
a
can only
demon?
assume Danica had something called Project Thur because Hunt is a descendant of Thur because she can sniff out bloodlines, right? And
Yeah.
she's seen the Umbra Mortis, I'm sure, through like auxiliary stuff. And so she probably scented it. And so they didn't really talk about what Project Thur even was.
No, they
And so
said they
I
haven't figured it out.
and so I bet it's Hunt's lineage.
In like all of the artwork of Thur, they're like, wow, that looks like Hunt.
What if he is Thur, like a reincarnation of Thur?
Oh my God.
He might
Stop.
be.
Stop
I
it.
don't I don't care. I don't care about Hunt. I don't care.
Moving on.
So we already talked about Cormac. One thing that was weird about Cormac though is that they referenced, they never brought it up again either, that he had a tattoo of strange symbols encircled on his biceps.
Mm.
And I was like,
Word marks?
I wonder if it's either word marks or if it's like part of the Illyrian tattoos.
Oh.
Because it also said that the Avalon males were born and bred for like war from a very, very young age, just like the Illyrians were.
Hmm.
Just a thought. I did want to touch briefly on the relationship comparison between Hunt and Bryce and Adis because Bryce and Adis, like I didn't notice it before, but it's like a very weird dynamic between the two. Obviously because Bryce reminds Adis of Thea based off of what Rigelis said
Mm-hmm.
and what Apollyon said. We haven't gotten that from Adis himself. When he was telling Bryce, like, hell is at your command, like, let us know when to strike. And then Apollyon said that to her as well. Hunt asked Apollyon, like, did you also try to speak with Bryce? And Apollyon said, if I went into her mind, my brother would be very angry with me. which I was like, oh, weird. Like, I wonder why. Like, he has such a weird claim on Bryce. And I know Rigellus was pretending to be Adis, but he says, hello, princess, the demon purred. The word with such intent, such delight, like he had some sort of claim on her.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rigellus was trying to pretend to be Adis. And so I wonder if he knows something that Bryce doesn't about like the way Adis feels. I don't know. But he also, like, it reminded me a lot of Rhysand. He said, it is your choice in the end. It has always been your choice.
I highlighted that quote because I was like, Rhysand literally said that to Feyre.
I know. And so I was like, I don't
And
know.
again, okay, so in my opinion, honestly, that passage was so good, but she literally ruined it by making it secretly be Rigelus.
I know.
Like that could have been such good development between Adis and Bryce because like now all of
Exactly.
that's fake.
I know.
It's not real.
So I just still don't know what's going on with Adis and Bryce. Like, I think they're going to be allies for sure. Will they be mates? Probably not. I'm kind of leaning more towards Asriel at this point, but we'll see. Maybe I could be wrong about all of it and Hunt's going to pull through. But on their relationship, so in Throne of Glass, the Fae have this thing called Karanam. And basically, it's like a partnership. And so let me pull up the exact like definition for you here. So it's a bond that you have between two people, like a mating bond, but not. And it says there's no way of telling until you try. And the bond is so rare that the majority of Fae never meet someone who is compatible or whom they trust enough to test it out. There's always a threat that they could take too much. And if they're unskilled, they could shatter your mind or could burn you out completely. So basically, when you're a Karanom, it refers to a bond between two Fae that allows Fae to share their magic, which is a strong advantage in battle and to communicate almost telepathically, which is exactly what Bryce and Hunt have.
Yeah.
And
Which it sounds like
so,
is still like a personal like connection, but that's
well,
not a
and
mating
so
bond.
what I think, because the mating bond, you have to like forge it, right? Like you have to accept it.
Hmm.
So, like with a mating bond, the bond of the Karanam does not require any involvement on either parts in the creation of it, but the bonded Fae will be aware of the change and aware when the bond is used. And so, like at the beginning, Bryce keeps saying like she can basically sense when Hunt's in a room based off of his power alone.
Yeah.
And so I think that they're Karnam. It also says that the bond is very similar to the mating bond, to the point where like sometimes you cannot tell the difference between a Karnam bond and a mating bond. It says in some cases Fae can be both mates and Karanam, but it's very rare. And so I think they're definitely that, because they can like power share. He can basically use her power, she can use his power, and that
And
makes sense to
obviously
me.
their bond is being described differently than mating bonds are normally described. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
again, Sarah, everything she writes is with intent. And
Right.
so I think she assumes that you would have that background info
Mm-hmm.
already.
Yeah, and so yeah, on page 33 it says he had only enter a room and she'd know if he was there by that surge of power in her body, like her magic, her very blood answered to his.
And it does.
And it does. And then on page 352, Hunt channeled his power through Bryce, like a Karanom. And then Rune said Bryce smelled different, but could not immediately tell why. And I think that's because it was the power or the scent of their powers combining instead of.
Yeah. Because like his power is literally in her blood right then
Yeah.
because it had just like gone through her, literally.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're
Yeah,
so
and then Rigelus is like talking about like the beacon and stuff, and Bryce was like, well, it like glows around Hunt too, and it says it also glows for those who you choose as your loyal companions, knights.
hmm.
So I think that's what Hunt is
Yeah.
in conclusion.
Same as Cormac,
I
which I
don't think,
mean, he's just a
because
loyal.
they also wanted her to bond. They also wanted her to marry Cormac too,
Mm-hmm.
and so I bet he could possibly be a Caranom for her as well. I definitely think they're maybe not mates, just they have a deep bond as Karanam.
I think you're right. And obviously they love each other, and we're not diminishing that, but like it's not a mating bond.
I don't think it's a mating bond.
I was just gonna say, like earlier, whenever we were talking about the Autumn King, like And this is so like tinfoil hat. Like it's not. But you were like, what if he's super old?
Mm-hmm.
And we also talked last episode about how it seemed like the orrery that he had was the same as Rhysand's.
Right.
But then the astronomer also said that someone in Avalon had crafted it.
A
So
long
maybe
time ago.
a long
So
time
like
ago.
15,000 years ago, a long time ago. Like, could it have been something that they saw in the night court and they crafted their own?
Maybe. I don't
It's just
know.
weird that like they're living in essentially like the same time frame in their two different timelines, and like
Yeah.
they have both ended up with the exact same Ori.
Because let's see. The Daglan would have been
Or what if like the Autumn King built his based off of what was in like the Fae archives that was taken over from Prithian?
that makes more sense to me. Because I was like,
Because Rhysand built his
yes.
based off of what he found in his research from their Fae archives.
And we also have talked about how we think that the library at least contains some of the same books. I'm not saying that like every single book has.
That's the other thing that I don't get though, is like, how did I mean, if the library just constantly moves, like maybe it's not always like the exact same, or like maybe it can exist in different places, because how could the book of, well, they don't technically have the book of breathings because they threw
Because,
it into the cauldron, which they threw into the ocean.
and so what if the cauldron itself, like, should have the ability to open a rift?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess I'm not positive. It's never said that the cauldron itself has opened a rift. But like, what if it did and sent the book of breathing? Like, I don't know. Because
So
like
either they
obviously
time
Jessica has
traveled
it.
or they're living in the exact same like time frame.
I think
I
that's what's
don't
most
know.
confusing to me. But the other thing I was going to say is like we have so like such limited information on Jessica as well. Um,
Yeah, like the Under King didn't even know like she went by that name.
yeah, and it's like we know that she like swore her alliance to the Underking, and of course she's doing it to her own end. It's not like she like wants
I
the
think
benefit of the
she
Underking.
is spying on the Under King for Adis. Now that we know
Ooh.
that the Prince of Hell, now that we know that the Princes of Hell were allies and that the Under King works for the Asteri, I
Mhm.
think Adis had her defect from the witches, because I also think the witches are trying to ally themselves with the Asteri.
We haven't talked about the witches yet, but yeah.
I have a whole
So
thing on Lydia Servos. Before we hop into Lydia, then we promise we'll wrap this up. Actually, no, deal with it. It's just gonna be a long
yeah,
episode.
I'm not sorry.
Um, Wanted to touch briefly on Fury and also the Mystics. So Fury says that she only knows that Danica is a bloodhound because she confronted her when they first met. She scented me and wanted to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So what is Fury? I
What
think
is fairy?
what like I know that Asteri can't like reproduce, because at first I was like, what if she's like an offspring of like an Asteri?
Do you think? Because obviously there are similarities between her and Amaranth's like
Yes.
physical form, at least. Because even Bryce is like, that lady kind of looks like Fury.
Which Amren's form is very similar to the form in the day court.
I guess I'm just not sure because Amaranth is like in a high phase
We
body,
don't know why
basically.
Amren took that form either.
She said she likes it.
But where'd she get it?
I don't know. And it's like they make
They keep
Fury
bringing it
sound,
up.
yeah, and they make Fury sound like she's so obviously not like high
Veneer.
fae or like like the fae like as Midgard understands the fae to be.
Mm-hmm. But she's highly coveted by the Asteri.
She can do something and it's something
Same
that
as
she wanted to
Lydia,
keep
though.
secret. And I'm curious to hear what you think
I
about
have some,
Lydia.
yeah, I have some ideas.
Does it have to do with the story she told Rune?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
I figured.
It absolutely does. It also has something else. to do. That's all I had on Fury. I don't know what she
I don't
is. No
even
one
know
knows
what
what she
to,
is. I
yeah,
don't even
and
know where to
honestly,
start.
it's pissing me off at this
And it
point.
doesn't matter either. The Mystics, they are able to see other galaxies, planets, both present and future. It sounds like Elaine's powers.
It does.
I don't know where they got those from if they're in the same time.
Okay, so Elaine was given a power by the cauldron rather than Nesta. Nesta took power.
Well, and it says Erd like chose the Mystics.
Mm-hmm.
So if Erd and the mother are the same thing, then it's
Then it
like
makes
a
sense that that would
cauldron
be,
blessed gift.
yeah, it's just like a power that's given. So that makes sense that it would be like kind of
At will.
a blessing, if you will. Um,
Blessing.
it is interesting that in order for the mystics to be able to use their powers in Midgard, they have to be in weird, like, science-y tanks and shit. Because
Agreed.
Elaine does not.
Yeah, the Mystics are weird.
So I
That's just
don't really
a
get that part.
that's actually a theory I saw online and I was like, yeah, I kind of like that. I have nothing else.
Did it like differentiate them like from Elaine at all? I'm just
Not
like, why
really.
do they have to have all that extra? I guess maybe because they're seeing
I think
things
it's so that they
in
can
different
read
worlds.
what they see. Like it was so that the astronomer could like
Could
basically
read it for
control the
himself.
environment.
That's fair. And
Because
also
Elaine was also
Elaine,
very confused when she gave her
yeah,
predictions.
which I'm sure she wasn't seeing a lot of things that made sense. And she also, it seems, only saw things that directly impacted their realm.
And when the mystics are asked a question,
They have to
they
like
can they have
travel.
to work together. So maybe Elaine's like missing the other two mystics that she needs to like answer questions. Because it has to be a male, a female, and then a male and a female
Hmm.
for balance.
I don't know.
Maybe it's just similar talents. But they seem very similar. I don't know. So with Lydia, she has a lot going on that I'm weirded out about. So I want to start first with her family. So we know that her mom was Hecuba, the witch queen, and that her dad was a powerful stag shifter. So in the first book, it says that Avalon is ruled by the king stag.
Mm.
And she says that her family is a very influential one. So I was like, what if like her father is the king of like the high king of Avalon? Her mom was the queen of the witches, and no one knew anything about her sire. And so maybe it was like a secret like joining because they tried to see like what side she would go to. But then in her story, she talked of a witch. She said, once upon a time, before Luna hunted the heavens, and Solus warmed Chithona's body, before Ogenes blanketed Midgard with water and Erd twined our fates together, there lived a young witch in a cottage deep in the woods. She was beautiful, blah, blah, blah. Her mother had done her best to raise her, with only her companions being the denizens of the forest. She grew older, strong, and proud, but a wandering prince paused by a clearing one day when her mother was gone, beheld her beauty, and wanted her desperately to be his bride. She had no interest in the prince or any of his offerings. What she wanted was a true heart to love her, to run wild with her through the forest, but the prince would not be denied. He chased her through the woods, his hounds falling. As she ran, she pleaded with the forest she loved so dearly to help her. So it did. First, it transformed her into a deer, so she might be as swift as the wind, which she is a deer shifter. But his hounds outraced her, closing in swiftly. Then the forest turned her into a fish, and she fled down one of the mountain streams. But he built a weir at its base to trap her, so she became a bird, a hawk, and soared for the skies. But the prince was a skilled archer, and he fired one of his iron-tipped arrows. It struck her breast, and where her blood fell, olive trees sprouted. Her body hit the earth. The forest transformed her one last time. And then it says, when she does finally continue it, the forest transformed her into a monster with claws and fangs, and she ripped the prince to shreds. She remained a monster for 100 years, roaming the forest, killing all who drew near. 100 years, so long that she once forgot she was a witch who once possessed a home in a forest she loved. And then she finds her prince and whatever. But I think that story I think initially it was about her,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds like maybe she was once a witch. And
Yeah.
so I think she's both, like a witch and a shifter somehow, because
Yeah.
Baxian is an angel and a shifter. And so I think it can be done. And like three different times they mentioned this silver torque around Lydia's
Yes.
throat. And so I think that the Asteri found out who she was, and that torque is like somehow like controlling her powers,
Oh, like a collar almost.
which is something that happens in Throne of Glass as well.
Okay. Well, something that you said, and of course, I'm not finished with Throne of Glass by any means, but something that you said about the stag
Which is a
reminds me
prevalent thing
of,
in Throne of Glass.
okay, because yeah, like the stag is like in Terrasen, where Selena is from, it is like the basically like the symbol that leads them home, that like
Yeah.
guides them home. So,
Yes.
and I don't know where that's going yet because I'm only partially into the
Um,
the second book.
what I also thought was weird was that she was said to resemble Luna twice in this book.
That's
Lydia was.
interesting.
So Rune said she was a spitting image of Luna, and then someone later said that she was beautiful and cold as the statue of Luna. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
like, that's weird that she mentioned it twice now, about Luna, like just being compared to her. I don't know if that's anything important, but she was also brought on to
Well,
Sandra.
you're like, I don't know if that's anything important. Okay, so who else did Luna remind you of? Feyre. And so it's like, what if Lydia is like also descended from the Dusk Court?
Maybe.
And then they all kind of like they take after Luna. I mean, because Feyre is also, I mean, they don't look exactly the same physically, but
So
no, like
I think she
symbol
actually
wise.
takes after a character that is in Throne of Glass, who I cannot
Oh,
mention.
so I don't know
So,
yet. Okay,
or more. She also looks like more because she has blonde hair and brown eyes.
you're right.
I don't know. We
And
still
Moore's
don't know
power
anything
is
about Moore's
truth.
powers, so
It's truth, damn it.
but she was brought onto Sandriel's Triarie at a very young age, and no one knows why. And so I think, yeah, she's got like these incredible powers, and the Asteri like have her
And
on a
she's
leash basically.
she's basically enslaved, but not publicly.
Because Celestina even says, I know very well what manner of threat Lydia Servos poses.
Mm-hmm.
And the witches want her in power over Hypaxia. And I think it's because they know that she works for the Asteri, and the witches are trying to ally with the Asteri
Yeah, they're actively, which is like kind of bonkers.
because their power is also draining. Because, like the witches in Throne of Glass, which this is not a spoiler, but they also draw their power from the land.
Which makes sense. There's so much that I don't know, just like kind of missing that like Throne of Glass
Mm-hmm.
piece.
I just thought her bedtime story was very strange.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. When she was telling it, I was like, this is about her.
What if she can shift into like multiple forms?
Well, I was wondering because I mean, that's what happened in her story. And I mean, that would make sense that they would want to be able to kind of like prevent her from using her full powers because that's very
I just don't know why
useful.
else they would mention the torque literally so many times.
Yeah. Which I always got confused because they talked about the torque as like somehow symbolizing the fact that she killed people. I don't really
Like
understand
the
that.
silver bullets on, well, because her dread wolves have like the silver bullets, and I
Hmm.
think people just assumed like she'd killed so many people that she had a silver necklace made.
Okay. I see.
But I mean, they never said anything else about it, and so that's what I'm guessing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is maybe it's like Gorsian stone or something,
Maybe.
which I guess it couldn't be because then all of her powers would be.
Yeah, she wouldn't be
But
able to
maybe
use any
it's a
powers.
similar
No
like
one's ever seen her shift either, though.
yeah, that's true. Like they say she's a shifter, but
I don't know. But the last thing is just the connection of mythology. So we already talked about Deanna and Luna being essentially the goddess Artemis. Sarah J. Maas also uses a lot of parallels to Greek gods and mythology. So Thanatos in Greek mythology is the god of dead. So he resides in the underworld with Hades. So the stars, this is interesting. So each of the stars are named after actual constellations. Um, so I'll start with the first constellation, which is Orion. So Hunt's name is Orion. Orion is actually a very famous story in Greek mythology. Um, Orion was a hunter who was said to have been able to hunt any animal in existence, and he was also the lover of the goddess Artemis. They do not have a happy ending. So Bryce has Luna's horn,
Oh.
and Luna is supposed to resemble the goddess Artemis. And
Oh,
so
so
I
they're
think
not
it's
mates.
foreshadowing Artemis and Orion, like their story on Bryce and Hunt. Then we'll talk about the star. So, a star that is commonly seen with Orion the hunter, the constellation, is Sirius, who
Ooh, the
is a
fallen
wolf or
star.
the dog, and that is the fallen star of the
Fallen.
Asteri.
Hunt's fallen as well.
Yes, he's a fallen angel.
Hmm.
Um, so Sirius is derived from the Greek word Saros, which means glowing or scorching. And then we have Rigel or Rigelus, and it is a blue supergiant star that is in the constellation of Orion.
Oh,
And it's also known as the bright star. And I was like, oh, weird.
and he's the bright hand.
Mm-hmm. And then we have Ostrus, which I couldn't really find any similarities to that one, but I think
Mhm.
it's supposed to be like aural or astral, like astral,
Okay.
like stars. Then we have Eosphorus, which is the Greek name for the morning star or dawn bringer. We have Hesperus, which is the Greek name for the evening star and is historically the half brother of Eosphorus. Octartus is supposed to be Octanus, which is the South Star. Polaris is the North Star. And so they all like are very popular constellations that you can typically see. I just thought it was weird that Rigel is like the brightest star in the constellation of Orion.
Hmm.
And
And so
Sirius
that's
is
two stars that would be in the constellation of Orion then.
mhm.
Hmm.
And then we also have Apollyon, who is also known by that name in Greek history, also known as Abaddon, who is the angel of the abyss, also associated with Satan, which makes sense. He is the prince of the pit.
Hmm.
Um, and then in Greek mythology, we have the three fates, right? Who are the mother, the matron, and the crone, which are exactly like the three-faced goddess,
Hmm.
who is also the mother, the matron, and the crone.
And that's in Throne of Glass, correct?
It's in Throne of Glass, but it's also who the witches worship in Crescent City.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it's also what they assume the mother is, the cauldron, the mother in Akatar.
Hmm.
And so I think the three-faced goddess is actually the goddess of fates. And basically she's like guiding each of our main characters
Hmm.
like throughout this. I don't know. But
Yeah.
the story of Orion the Hunter was definitely one that like caught my eye.
Yeah, especially because we're convinced that they're not truly mated.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That wraps up Crescent City for now until Sarah graces us with some information on the third book. Hopefully, it's coming relatively soon. If you want to go ahead and get started on our next full length episode, we are going to be covering Book Lovers by Emily Henry. So we're kind of switching gears.
Yeah, it'll be a major change in vibes, but it's a really good book. It's super cute, a little rom-com, a palate cleanser, if you will, after this
Yes.
these long, long books that we've read. So next week we will actually be doing a mini-sode of Goodreads bad reviews for the Crescent City books. And those should be interesting. I'm sure people have some harsh opinions.
I'm sure.
Because even we were a little harsher than normal in some aspects. So go ahead, get started on Book Lovers. We'll talk to you then. And as always,
Let's get lit.